All right, this is Cut and Splice. This is Jason with Matt and Gil. We all went to film school together, and we used to live together, and we watched way too many movies together. And now we talk about movies, and that's what this is. Yeah. Okay. All right, all right, all right, all right. All right, we're talking about 1986's Manhunter, and as well as the 2002's Red Dragon. Both of these movies are an adaptation of the book Red Dragon, which I believe I wrote down Thomas Harris. I believe that's the guy's name.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. And that is the first book that comes before Silence of the Lambs, or The Silence of the Lambs. Um, and yeah, they're and so they are both adaptations of the same book, and we're going to discuss them at length.
And then, of course, as always, we'll mostly do reviewing and recommending, and then the second part we'll get into spoilers.
And comparing and contrasting.
And comparing and contrasting, for sure.
In this case.
Yes. And we'll try to do a better job than the first time around. At least focusing on comparing and not just getting stuck on flaws in each movie separately. But I guess they had that in common.
Did either of you guys see Red Dragon in theaters?
Yes.
Because I did. I was quite excited to see it.
I think I might have seen it. I think it was back then when I was watching more movies in theaters, and it had decent reviews, especially for a Brett Ratner movie. Yeah. So pre-Netflix and pre-COVID and stuff. Or kids.
I know Gil and I had the privilege of going to one of the screenings, the American Cinematheque screenings at the Egyptian Theater to see Manhunter. I had previously seen it once before that at home. Gil, was that the first time you had ever seen it, or had you seen it before that?
Yeah, I think it was the first time I saw it. Wasn't that screening?
Okay.
Yeah, I think the first time that I saw Manhunter, it was actually on a VHS tape. So fuck, I feel old. But yeah, it was a while ago, and actually I hadn't seen it in I think more than a decade before I rewatched it for this episode. So it was kind of fun revisiting it.
I was just going to say, regardless of whatever else we talk about, before getting into any details at all, I just want to say that I find it very interesting. This might have actually been one of the reasons why I brought it up as a thing I wanted to talk about with you guys, because I felt this way beforehand, and now after rewatching both of them, I definitely still feel the same way about it. Manhunter has what I feel is an odd kind of cult following, to it. There's a lot of people who really love that movie in a weird sort of way, and I really like it. I really like Manhunter. I think it's a very special movie, but for all of its praise and everything that I feel about it, at the end of the day, I do actually like Red Dragon more. And that's just kind of the basis of how my feelings are for these things.
I mean, I don't know if you want me to go full into my assessment, but I am finding myself much more deeply conflicted after rewatching these movies, and actually for the first time watching them back to back in the same night, in my overall assessments. Because, like, first of all, like, this is not okay. Manhunter is not Michael Mann at his worst. I mean, no. Michael Mann at his worst is like Public Enemy. I mean, he's made worse movies than Manhunter. Manhunter is Michael Mann at mediocre level, and Red Dragon is Brett Ratner at his best.
No complaints for me on that one.
And I honestly think that these movies are basically equals in terms of my assessment of them. the thing is, everything that Manhunter got right, at least to my mind, and you guys can challenge me on this as we go on, everything that Manhunter got right, Red Dragon got wrong, and everything that Red Dragon got right, Manhunter got wrong.
Interesting.
And a large part of that is the casting, to me, and how they actually dealt with the performances. The three leads in Will Graham, Francis Dollarhide, and Hannibal Lecter are really everything that both movies are focused on, obviously. Will Graham in Manhunter is played by William Peterson. In Manhunter, he's played by Edward Norton. Edward Norton is obviously more of a household name than William Peterson. I mean, unless you're a CSI fan or something.
Matt, just for a real quick correction,
well,
I think you said
now,
back in the
Manhunter
80s. had Ed Norton. You meant Red Dragon, I believe.
Right, right. Ed Norton played Will Graham in Red Dragon. William Peterson played the same role in Manhunter. Obviously, Hannibal Lecter was played by Anthony Hopkins in Red Dragon. In Manhunter, it was Brian Cox. And in Manhunter, Tom Noonan played Dollarhide. And in Red Dragon, he was played by Ray Fiennes. When you look at the cast of Red Dragon, just in those three roles, like you've got three really damn good actors who are basically household names. I mean, these are brilliant actors. But the thing is, they don't work together as a unit in the same way that the cast worked in Manhunter. I mean, in fact, they are so disparate that they needed to actually insert lines in Red Dragon, like we're not so different, you and I.
That line's in Manhunter too, though.
Yeah, but you didn't need it in Manhunter. You didn't need it because
there's no question that Manhunter is the more visual film, for sure.
Right, but my point is that Dollarhide, Lecter, and Graham all in Manhunter, the way the casting worked and the way that they all played off of one another in one way or another, you just kind of got it. That these are all kind of the same dude with minor differences. Whereas in Red Dragon, Anthony Hopkins is Hannibal Lecter. Like he just is Hannibal Lecter. Anybody who plays Hannibal Lecter from here on out is going to be imitating Anthony Hopkins. I mean, Brian Cox can't live up to that, and obviously he couldn't live up to it. Like 5 years before Silence of the Lambs came out.
Still a good performance, though. I liked it.
Yeah. It's still a good performance. I'm not dissing Brian Cox at all. It's just that Anthony Hopkins is Hannibal Lecter, but I didn't like how Edward Norton was basically playing Will Graham like a Boy Scout, and
yeah, that's true.
I don't like how they cast Ray Fiennes in the role of Dollarhide. I mean, again, I love Ray Fiennes. I think Ray Fiennes is one of the better actors that we have in the world today. But you cast him in that role, and then you've got Emily Watson, right?
Yes, Emily Watson.
Playing Reba. And you've got her like describing how people are talking about him at work, and you have to have her talking to Ray Fiennes and like, well, they say that you've got a great body and that you're self-conscious about your face, but you shouldn't be because you're super hot. And and that doesn't seem like a recipe for a psychopathic killer, whereas Tom Noonan isn't Ray Fiennes in terms of like being a good-looking dude. Tom Noonan in Manhunter, I buy that guy as being somebody who is so disgusted at himself that he starts torturing people and murdering people. But anyway, I've talked long enough.
I think there's an explanation for that, but I think I should leave it for the spoiler part.
All right.
Because I think it goes into the different approaches as far as theme and storytelling that both movies went for. But I do agree that it's a very good assessment about them being exactly equal, almost like they get different things right and wrong, that they equalize each other. It's you can make a masterpiece if you combine the two. Basically, it could be like as good as Silence of the Lamb.
Yeah.
And the funny thing on IMDb, they're both 7.2 exactly. And I did as far as rating goes, I guess we can get to that too. I rated them both 7, so without even knowing. So it's not without knowing before this episode. Like I rated Red Dragon back in the 2000s, and I rated Manhunter probably when we saw it at the screening with Maynard from Tool. But yeah, so that's it all makes perfect sense. It is interesting. The approaches are very different. I feel like Michael Mann here pulls a bit of a Spielberg in Duel. I just saw there was an article about Duel 50 years or something since the Spielberg's first movie. And it feels like he just put everything into this movie. He was like, I'm going to make this Citizen Kane. I'm gonna like just every scene's gonna be explosively visual and overly dramatic, and it's just so over the top. But it sort of worked for an '80s movie. It wouldn't work in the sequel, in the remake, unless Red Dragon, unless you really established that style, almost like a Sergio Leone type of stuff he was doing there. A bit like so over the top, but it was interesting. And then Red Dragon is, funny enough, William Peterson, it's like CSI. It feels like a procedural, like it's not very cinematic. It's just him going through houses and doing his investigation. Not a lot of visual storytelling going on there. So it's a very, there's a few good scenes with Elector that go a bit visually interesting, but very few. So it's funny. It's interesting. But then the Red Dragon did some subtle things story-wise that were, I felt, more sophisticated than Manhunter. So
agreed.
Yeah. So go figure. And we can get into them in the second half. But it is interesting how there's you couldn't find two such different movies made about the same story, but they're also of the exact same quality. Like that's such a weird combination. But that's what's on our hands, I feel like.
Yeah, and I mean, it is also interesting. At least for me, it was interesting just looking at Dante Spinotti in 1986 versus Dante Spinotti in 2002, shooting the exact same movie.
It's interesting you bring him up. One of the few things I remember about the Q&A, I don't even know if you'd call it a Q&A because it's not like he made the movie or anything, but when Gil and I went to go see it, as he mentioned briefly, it was one of those things where they pick a celebrity and they let them pick the movie kind of thing. And so Maynard, I guess, chose this movie, and they had him up there answering some questions, and more not really answering questions, more like talking about why he loved the movie and why he chose it and stuff. But before they said anything, they just said that somebody in their office at the Cinematheque or whatever said, like, they wanted to contact some of the filmmakers and just see if they could get a word or something about it or whatever. And I guess the message they got back from Dante Spinotti, I guess, or so he just said like something to the effect of every single shot that they set up in Manhunter was done with extreme purpose, I guess is the way he put it, something of that nature. Like I don't remember exactly his wording, but he just wanted to emphasize that to everybody that I guess him and Michael Mann spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how they wanted to do it. So I think that plays well into what Gil was saying about how it's this like, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to even describe that movie, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some stuff there, like they shoot him through the sun's going down on the locales too, like the if you compare between them, it's so romanticized in Manhunter,
Yes.
where they live initially, the sun goes down and the shiny and the lens flare and all these very elaborate moving shots. It's just him and his family relaxing. It's like setting up, but it's so romanticized that there's an impact to the story later on, because this is the life that he set up. And then Edward Norton's life in Red Dragon is like, yeah, he lives on
I don't know,
like a lake with a boat. Like, it still looks nice, but it's just not as romanticized visually.
Yeah, well, okay, so visually in the camera maybe, but they go out of their way to show that he's living in like what would essentially be like a tropical paradise kind of thing. They have some nice wardrobe choice things. Like when he's at home, he's always wearing sandals and shorts, which is like implying that he's very relaxed. He's got a very relaxed life. His wife is always wearing very like revealing clothing, not in like a slutty way, but in a we live on the beach sort of way. I mean, they definitely thought about it. They put some choices in there.
Oh yeah, no, it's mostly just not as romanticized as I feel like in Manhunter. It just really
that shot of
also
him in the bed discussing whether or not he's going to leave is like I remember watching that this time. Just
yeah, that's like crazy. That day for night thing, right? It's all bluish.
It is kind of day for night, yeah.
It is, because they're getting the moonlight as if it's the moonlight on the ocean, but it's obviously the sun. But it looks crazy, and I was like, and it's so sexy too. Like, it's such an 80s thing.
It is.
But
you mentioned the visuals and the really obvious choices and stuff. I don't know precisely what Michael Mann was thinking, but I definitely feel like there's some sort of visual theme that he wanted throughout the whole movie, because he keeps intentionally finding ways to well, I don't know if this is right or not. My interpretation of it was to put people in cages visually. He keeps filming people through grates and through windows and through things. There's even a moment where in Manhunter, Jack Crawford is played by Dennis Farina, the late great Dennis Farina. There's he's got this really odd paperweight on his desk that's like a sphere of glass in a box or something, and they intentionally move the camera just at the end of the scene just to like put him in the circle. It's really interesting, but and odd at the same time.
Yeah, this is in Manhunter, right?
Yeah, in Manhunter. Yeah, I'm talking about Michael Mann's one.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there's the shot of him running down the stairs, like after he sees Lecter.
Okay, I just got to say real quick. Okay, I could get into. I have a whole list of things I wanted to talk about comparing them, but I have to talk about that scene now that you brought it up. I think it's really cool that they have Will Graham react the way he does, but if there is one scene that is so over the top and so just taken to the point where it's bad in Manhunter, it's that scene, because the back and the forth, and I'm like, where the hell did you film this? This is clearly like, I mean, it's in LA. Anyone who's like been to the LA Convention Center sees it and goes, oh, this is used in like 18 different, futuristic movies that have been made throughout the decades and whatever. I don't know. It's not the LA Convention Center, but it looks like it. It's ridiculous. There's just, and why? Why is he not in the elevator? Why did he not? It's like 7 or 8 floors of a zigzagging back and forth. Oh my God.
Yeah, no. It's hilarious. And there's some other stuff too.
And yet I actually think that if Red Dragon, I mean, don't do any of that, obviously, but if they had at least had him walk out and just react a little bit more, like even that one was missing something. Like, I don't want the William Peterson reaction, but give me something. He just kind of gets on the phone with his family or with Jack Crawford or something, and Jack's like, "Are you all right?"
Yeah, he's all relaxed. He's way too
I mean,
with it. Yeah.
It just, I don't know. Neither of them are perfect, but that scene to me
they're
is
completely
definitely where it
different
goes over
characters. No, their characters. The biggest difference between the two movies is the lead character. It's there's no doubt that the way they approach that is just completely different, and it'll be interesting. We should get into it in the second half. Maybe we'll discover something as we talk about it of why that is, or maybe we have theories.
Well, before we go there, I'll just finish. I'll follow up with what you said. For me, I can't even think about how I would rate these movies without comparing it to Silence of the Lambs, because I mean I saw that first, and I think I saw Silence of the Lambs first when I was pretty young, relatively speaking, of course. I saw part of Manhunter on TV. I watched about maybe 45 minutes to an hour of it, but I didn't finish it because there was something happening and I had to leave or something like that. I also just didn't think it was as good as Silence of the Lambs. And then when I heard that Red Dragon was coming out, I was really excited about that. I saw that and maybe Hannibal or something like that in that order. But
it was a year before Red Dragon, so
right. Well, but I can tell you for sure I didn't see Hannibal in theaters. So I probably saw Hannibal on a DVD probably very soon before Red Dragon or just after. It doesn't really matter. That's not important. My point was just simply to say that I consider Silence of the Lambs to be like a 9.5. I think it's like a phenomenal movie. I would say Red Dragon is probably an 8, and then Manhunter probably a solid 7, and then Hannibal's like a 6.
Okay.
Oh, so Red Dragon's more for you.
Just a bit, yeah. Or noticeably, but not a lot.
Well, I was about to interject and say that we might be pushing on spoilers already, so we should probably go into the second half.
Yeah,
so
let's do that.
Might as well do the ratings. And I mean, honestly, it's funny. Like Gil was talking about them, both Manhunter and Red Dragon being 7.2s on IMDb. I think they're both 7.5s for me. I think they cancel each other out. I think that the strengths of Manhunter are there, and Red Dragon missed a lot of opportunities, and I think that there are strengths to Red Dragon that were there that Manhunter missed, and they just kind of even out for me. I mean, I think they're both 7.5s for me. So
and interestingly, the people who did see them differently, the critics, it seems like they rated 6 for like 60 Metascore, and then 75, like 7.5 for Manhunter. So Red Dragon is rated lower. But yes, and this could be based on what I saw. Some of the arguments they're making is that Manhunter is really borderline an art house movie about a procedural. It really takes it to a high level of cinematic experience. And it's similar, I guess, to what David Fincher maybe does in Zodiac, and where the visuals are so strong that they, regardless of what the actual specifics, it elevates the movie, and maybe critics just react more to that highbrow type of stuff than Red Dragon just being a solid procedural with very good cast. That's about it.
So, what are your ratings?
Oh, I threw it. I said 7 and 7. I said it a bit earlier, but yeah, I jumped the gun there.
Yes. Just wanted to be sure. But this is something where I actually think this is relevant. We should actually give Michael Mann a little bit more credit, though, because like he didn't have that built-in like baseline. Like I mean, Jonathan Demme made the decision to cast Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, so Brett Ratner didn't have to make that decision. Brett Ratner could basically and basically did remake Manhunter shot for shot in a lot of ways up until the end. And, by the way, we can talk about this too. Yes, Red Dragon, especially when it comes to the ending, is more faithful to the book than Manhunter was. But Brett Ratner didn't have to make any decisions.
I think, Matt, I think we would all agree that even if you were just showed these two movies to somebody and they didn't know anything else, I mean, I think that most people would agree that Michael Mann is a far, far better director than Brett Ratner. But as you said in the beginning, this is a pretty mediocre show of Michael Mann's talents, whereas I think we're all in agreement that this is Brett Ratner's greatest work that he's ever done, and essentially what he was paid to do in this movie. Because I mean, let's face it, he's basically a traffic cop, as a traffic cop of a director. What he was paid to do was to, make a prequel that would look and feel as much like Silence of the Lambs as possible. And I mean, considering what Manhunter looked like, I guess that also goes a long ways of showing how talented Spinati is, as because he just basically made the movie look a lot like the way the other two movies look as well.
Yeah, I was gonna throw something before I forget. Silence of the Lambs, I rated it an 8. So I've never been a huge fan of that movie, but it's still higher than these two for sure. Yeah, I know. It's kind of long and boring. I mean, the stuff with Lecter is really good, but it's only those few scenes. The rest of the movie is... Jodie Foster is only good when she's with Lecter. I feel like other than that, she's not as captivating. And that... but that's for a different episode. but just it is funny. I've always found weird how that movie it's on top. I know the performance is like an all times best. Like it's like Brando and and like Godfather or Apocalypse Now. Obviously, it's that type of caliber performance. But that's pretty much it. The movie itself is not spectacular. It's okay.
I'm trying to verify this, but I think that Anthony Hopkins was nominated for Best Actor, and he only had 15 minutes of screen time.
You talking about for Silence of the Lambs?
Yeah.
It won, for Best Picture. Best Actor for Anthony Hopkins, Best Actress for Jodie Foster, Best Director for Jonathan Demme. It kind of swept, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Ted Talley.
Yeah, but
who, by the way, wrote the screenplay for Red Dragon.
Yeah, but I mean the point being that Anthony Hopkins was barely on the screen.
Yes,
in terms of actual time.
I mean that's why I said Brando and Apocalypse Now, because Brando is on the screen for 5 minutes and it's very memorable.
Yes, good comparison.
Great comparison.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Brett Ratner was a weird choice for it, and
very
Jason
weird.
kept saying, whenever I saying to Jason that Red Dragon is his best movie, he's like, "Well, Rush Hour is pretty good."
It is. Rush Hour is good, and Money Talks is fun, but
no, they're not bad. Yes,
they are.
And by the way,
from Red Dragon.
I'll say one last thing about rating directors and stuff. I don't mind as much as most people X3. Like I actually don't think it's that bad of a movie.
That's because you don't read comic books.
Yeah, maybe, but it's those kind of movies, and that's what Brett Ratner pulls off. Like you said, he's a traffic cop. Like he can just emulate at a low level, and it's just good enough. For those specific movies, it kind of works. It's not spectacular, but it's comfort food. It just works. It's a movie experience. It's generic. I don't know, but it's safe more than anything. But we should definitely get to the second. Unless, is there anything else before we get to the spoilers?
I thought we were already.
Yeah. Keep going.
Oh, we should always say the word spoilers multiple times to scream it. Spoilers. Because unless I'm going to cut the episodes in two.
Okay. Spoilers are going to abound at this point. One thing that is interesting is, I kind of alluded to this earlier. that the ending of Red Dragon, surprise, surprise, is actually more faithful to the actual Thomas Harris book, Red Dragon, than Manhunter was. Like
Well,
that
I don't
whole.
know where you're going, but just to throw it out there, not just the ending, other stuff too. But
Oh yeah,
go on.
well, yeah, especially the end. You know,
Yeah.
in the book, Dollarhide does fake his death in the home that he burns down, and then he shows up at Will Graham's house later on. And I mean, again, there are still differences. Like in the book, Dollarhide stabs Will Graham in the face and permanently scars him before Will Graham's wife Molly comes in and shoots Dollarhide to death. The ending of Red Dragon isn't as brutal as the ending of the book, but obviously Manhunter ends with Will Graham busting through Dollarhide's window and killing Dollarhide before he's able to mutilate shit, what's her face,
Joan
Reba.
Allen.
Right. And the movie ends at Dollarhide's house in Manhunter, whereas Red Dragon actually follows the book all the way back to Will Graham's house and Molly killing Dollarhide at the end. Honestly, I'm a little conflicted about which was the better approach, but I'll throw that out to you guys.
I think the biggest difference plays with the two movies plays into what you just said, and also what you said before about how a lot of it's about the main character and how their approach to it. I think
Yeah.
the biggest difference is, I mean, look at the names of the movies, right? They changed the name for Manhunter to Manhunter from Red Dragon. Manhunter, Michael Mann's film, Manhunter, came out before Silence of the Lambs and is a adaptation of the book where they alter the story in subtle and not so subtle ways, and they focus and wrap the entire story around Will Graham. It's really all about him. Everything with Dollarhide is less. You get less screen time, less scenes, less story, less everything. Everything with Lecter is less scenes, less story, less everything. It's all about Graham. And that's why it makes sense at the end to end it the way they did. That's why the scenes with Lecter are shorter and faster paced. They're just kind of getting through them. They don't have that kind of reverence for his character, which probably is only there because of how well Anthony Hopkins did in Silence of the Lambs. But yeah, just that's my take on it, is that's the difference. And that's one of the things, I won't go too deep into this because it's not really what we're talking about just yet, but that's one of the main things I like about Red Dragon more. In Red Dragon, they give you so much more of Dollarhide falling in love with Reba. I really like what they have in Manhunter, what's there, but it's really short. I mean, he on his very first time meeting her in that movie, he takes her to like the freaking zoo or something, like right away to the tiger scene. It's like so truncated and so fast. It's kind of like what's wrong with every single movie adaptation that doesn't do a good job of adapting the book. They just kind of rush through the important stuff. Whereas in Red Dragon, you get so much emotion out of Ray Fiennes and Emily Watson. Both of them, they are like fantastic. They got this like weird chemistry in that movie that works, and it pays off because you get this whole thing where just as the characters are starting to get closer and closer and closer to each other, the guy's about to do his third big murder of like a whole family kind of thing. He's getting closer to the moon, the lunar cycle that he uses to kill with and whatever. And he suddenly is falling in love for the first time with a real woman. I mean, I'm assuming he's never had a girlfriend before with how freaky this dude is. And yeah, he's falling in love and he wants to stop. And it's crazy because Will, as the guy who should know him better than anybody else, said at the beginning that that's almost an impossibility. It'll never happen. And yet it did. It's like a miracle, basically. He starts falling in love and he takes steps to try and never let the red dragon out again. He wants to stop. And that's amazing. Like, and unfortunately it doesn't all work out because the movie has to keep going. But that's a great part of the story that's completely absent in Manhunter. Like in Manhunter, the guy literally takes her to his house just to be another victim at the end. Like there's almost no inkling that he cares for her in the same ways that they do in the story, or the way that the story should be. You know, he takes her there and he kind of starts doing creepy stuff like turning the radio up really loud and kind of like letting her freak out for a bit before he's going to kill her and stuff. Like there's no indication that he's emotionally going through this evolution as a character. And then the ending, as you said, is totally different.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah.
I was gonna say about that ending. It's also a bit. It's really over the top in Manhunter. It really almost makes no sense. But I guess he's supposed to be demented. Like he's supposed to just completely be out of his wits. Like he doesn't know what he's doing. He's compulsive in those moments, and he.
Are you referring to Graham or Dollarhide? And
no, I mean to Graham jumping through the glass. Like, what was that? Like, why does he smash into the glass?
That would hurt so much.
Why not come through the front door? Like, I just don't. Yeah, it's so over the top. It's the worst way to jump into where a serial killer is because you're at a disadvantage. You're gonna be hurt.
Why not shoot first?
Also, why don't you just
put a bullet through the glass?
It's so over the top. Like it almost kills the movie for me there. It's like, this is so unnecessary. But I guess, and that's a big thing we can work our way back from, is that, yes, in Manhunter, it's all about him. It's called Manhunter. He hunts men. And it's got this whole psychology thing that Lecter, the way he found Lecter is that there's a mini Lecter in his head, and this is how he discovers people, which, by the way, both movies don't actually illustrate it in a sophisticated way. I've seen movies or read stories where you really like see that implemented well, or the person becomes the villain in order to understand them and think like them. I don't feel like this is really... does it does it a little bit with Red Dragon in the end when he uses psychology to trick him to get him to leave the kid. But generally it's both movies intend to have this there where they think like the villains, but it doesn't really, and that's why Manhunter goes so far. But I think they just never earn it for it to go that crazy. That's it needs to be like just slightly less crazy. Like he still needed to go in. He needed to like put himself in danger, but not stupidly so.
Yeah. This is one more thing I liked better in Red Dragon is that the opening scene and the scrapbook scenes that they show really show that there's like this thing where Dollarhide just loves and idolizes Lecter. And I felt like when I was watching Manhunter again, I was like, they just suddenly jumped to this scene where like, oh, by the way, he sends him this thing of toilet paper. We found it in his cell. We got to hurry up and do this thing. I was like, where was the indication in this movie at all that Tom Noonan, Dollarhide, actually even knew anything about Lecter or cared about him, other than the fact that he was like a celebrity serial killer type thing? You know, like that, it just comes out of nowhere in Manhunter. But anyway, what I was trying to say is, I guess the story is supposed to go that Dollarhide is obsessed with Hannibal Lecter. He sends him a secret thing in the mail with the toilet paper message, basically, and they can't read his mail because it's against the law. So he opens it up, he reads it, and then on the section that he destroys was a directions for Lecter to respond in the personal ads of the Tattler magazine. And so from that point on, after the toilet paper message, they were corresponding using the personal ads.
And even that, like the toilet paper. In Manhunter, they bring the specialist from a different place just because he's gonna do it so much better. There's so much attention to detail about the way, like Will Graham is such a fanatic in that movie. No, fingerprint him. They fingerprint him. No, bring the guy that we know that's the best fingerprinter in the world, and he's gonna find the fingerprints.
I did like that they actually in Manhunter, after he says that, it kind of pays off because it shows the fingerprint specialist and he's like, I got it for you, whatever. There's like that little brief scene. You feel like it all paid off. And they still have that same thing in Red Dragon, but they don't do it nearly the same way. He just kind of says, oh, have them check the corneas, have them check this, have them check that. And it's not, they didn't bring in the specialist, I guess.
Yes, no, and maybe that could lead into the discussion about just the lead character, because I do think Edward Norton, and they both did the whole slightly demented thing of talking while talking to themselves, and Edward Norton did it better than William Peterson.
I was just gonna say that. You're talking about like when they walk through the crime scene.
Yeah, and they're like, "Oh, you sick bastard! That's what you did. That's what you did, right?
You took the glove off, didn't you?" I feel like if you were to like talk about, well, I don't know, there's plenty of movies we could talk about, but like I don't know, like The Silence of the Lambs. What's the core thing in that movie? Like, what are you showing up for? It's the scenes between Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins doing their little. I mean, it's like you could that's become like a thing when you talk about other movies. You say, oh, it's like a Hannibal Lecter experience. You know, like in the last James Bond movie. You know, when they got the bad guy in prison. You know, it's like it's become a thing. You know, it's like that's what you're there to see. With this movie, I think you're there to see like the core thing that you're there to see is Will Graham walking through these CSI scenes and talking to himself and basically putting himself in the air quotes in the mind of the serial killer. And I think that Ed Norton does it a little bit better, even though I love Will Peterson's performance. I really do. Something about his I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. I just thought Ed Norton did it a little better.
He just contained it more, pretty much. Like he didn't go too far with it, but at the same time it was too contained. But that's, I guess, the big differences between the characters, that apparently Edward Norton internalizes what he went through psychologically to get Lecter and putting himself in danger there in the beginning and all that. But he doesn't show it too much. It actually doesn't seem to hinder him very much. Maybe slight bad judgment here or there, but he's basically with it. The Manhunter version is just a lunatic. Like he's really does not have things under control. He's a man obsessed. And that's why he goes through the glass and doesn't wait to go with the SWAT team.
In Manhunter, after the family is threatened, they put a scene in that I really liked with Graham talking to his son. They're in the grocery store and he's kind of talking to him, and he's got to explain to him that, like, look, you were too young when this Hannibal Lecter thing happened and I got hurt, but you got to know that, like, after this happened, I had to get therapy. And I really like that scene. It's kind of killed for me because in the scene, there's so much product placement on the aisles behind them that are clearly in focus. And then the two characters stop moving the cart. And as their conversation plays out, the product placement behind them changes 3 times. So without them moving. So it's a little frustrating, but
not to digress too much, but my memory might be failing me. I just want to throw this out there, though. Upon rewatching Manhunter, I don't actually recall any moment in Manhunter in which they actually referred to Hannibal as a cannibal.
I don't know. I don't remember.
I don't think that Manhunter ever even brought up that Hannibal Lecter was eating his victims.
Huh.
Yeah, they mention, did they call him Hannibal Lecter, or did they just call him
Well,
Lecter?
they call him Hannibal Lecter, but they,
They spelled it differently. Yeah, they spelled it with a K in Manhunter, and it's a C in the novel.
While we're talking about it and comparing them, I just want to say that I think Brian Cox is amazing. Like, I love Brian Cox in general and in this movie.
It's a good performance. Yes, it's just that Anthony Hopkins just took it one step further.
Exactly, and I was gonna say that, like, if there's two scenes in Manhunter that I think really do it better. Well, for one, there's a scene that's not even in Red Dragon, which is the scene with the jogger. Right after they do the Tattler's thing where they kind of put out the fake article, they're like baiting the Red Dragon character to come kill him. There's that scene with the jogger, and they're like Graham's walking through an empty parking lot. I really like that scene, even though it's a little long. Other than that, though, and I thought it was funny because it's like so 80s and it's got so much slow-mo in it in the scene. And then right afterward, the black guy makes a joke. Basically there's a character in the scene that is not actually a serial killer. They thought he was, so they tackle him and they get their guns out and they don't end up killing him, as they realize he's not like a criminal or something. I think he's like handcuffed or something, and he's like, as they're walking away, he goes, like, Will Graham says, "Let him go," or something like that. And the guy looks at the cops and goes, "What are you moving in slow motion?" And I thought that was really funny. Anyway, I like that scene a lot, and that's not even in Red Dragon, so that's definitely one really nice thing for Manhunter. But the scene where I think Brian Cox shines more than any other is when he's doing the phone scene, where he calls the FBI field office or something like that in order to trick someone, like a secretary, into giving him Will Graham's home address. He is so incredible in that scene, and so you see, because we're looking at his face, we see that his voice is saying one thing and his face is not genuinely saying it, and it's just, it all plays out so beautifully. And if I had to guess, I would even say that Anthony Hopkins probably looked at that scene a lot before creating his version of Hannibal Lecter. And even though I do think Anthony Hopkins is Hannibal Lecter, like Matt said, he lives and breathes that. He's like perfect. But I just love Brian Cox, even though I don't think he's quite as good. That one scene, he just like shines.
Yeah, he's charming. That's what Lecter is supposed to be. Is supposed to be able to switch that on and be this manipulative. Anthony Hopkins plays it a bit demented. Like he doesn't sweeten himself up enough, but he still gets what he wants.
Yeah.
It's just a different way, but yes, the shift from and in general, I feel like Brian Cox never plays them too demented, so maybe that's what it is. It just fits better.
I think some of it's just the directing and the editing, though, too, because like I said before, I mean, compare the first scene where we get to see Lecter. There's that great moment where Brian Cox is like laying down in this creepy way, but after that, which is awesome, they have their exchange, right, where he's asking him to look at the case file, and he doesn't want, well, he does want to, but he wants to try and get as much out of it as he can, and they're kind of dueling back and forth verbally, sparring. And it surprised me because I know the scene so well in my head, and I was watching it again on a Manhunter, and Brian Cox and William Peterson, they're like, it's the same words. They're probably straight out of the book, I bet. And it's fast. Like, they're just kind of bouncing the lines back and forth. But in Red Dragon, there's like this like slow, I don't know, like I just feel like they had more of a reverence for all the Lecter scenes. In that one, there's that whole thing where he kind of approaches, Anthony Hopkins approaches the glass, and he gets right up to Ed Norton, and he kind of, when he challenges him and says, like, I think you'd want to just see if you're smarter than this guy. And he says something like, that implies that you think you're smarter than me. And they kind of go back and forth. there's like this pregnant pause before Ed Norton just says like, you had disadvantages. And he says like, such as, and he says like, well, you're insane. You know, and he's like, it just plays out so much more dramatically in Red Dragon than it does in Manhunter. And I think that might have, you know, that might play into why, even though Brian Cox is amazing, maybe it just didn't, maybe if they had been planning to make that character a bigger thing and it wasn't all focused on Graham, maybe he would have, you know, slowed those scenes down a little or something. I don't know.
It's actually kind of funny to think about that, you know, like Michael Mann, and I want to preface any of my statements by saying that I think that Michael Mann is one of the greatest filmmakers that we have.
Work with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I still want to work with you.
Yeah,
please.
But I mean, if he does have a flaw, it's that he's too clinical. Like, I mean, he is incredibly clinical, methodical, fact-based, information-driven. I mean, like, you know, there are stories about when he was making Ali. You know, apparently he was actually switching out extras in the crowd for the boxing scenes to match photographs of some of the Muhammad Ali photographs of those fights. Like he was actually swapping out extras to look like the photographs. Like, this guy is clinical. This guy is methodical to sometimes to a fault. I mean, there are certain movies like Heat, which is a masterpiece, and then there are movies like Manhunter where maybe his methodical nature crept into the filmmaking, and scenes like the one that you're talking about, where you get a guy like Brett Ratner who probably doesn't think anything through, you know, just lets the actors play, and you get something brilliant out of your actors, and you get something emotionally poignant out of that. That might be something Michael Mann, you know, just getting into Michael Mann's brain. He's just methodical. He's just clinical. He is just clean room, get the information to people. That's just my impression. I could be wrong. So yeah.
I think we go for a talk with him. It was like Last of the Mohicans.
We all three of us went and saw Last of the Mohicans at the Egyptian.
Yeah. No, he's definitely, when you listen to him speak, you just say like, oh wow, this guy's on a different level. Like the level of the level of like thought that he put into things and research, and it almost sounds like Kubrick level type of obsession. I couldn't believe that
it was how many years had it been roughly since since Last of the Mohicans when we saw that? Probably at least 15 years or something.
Well, Last of the Mohicans was early 90s.
Let's just say early 90s. And when did we see it? We were all living together, probably, right? It was like 2010.
Last of the Mohicans was 1992.
Okay. So we were approaching 20 years since he had made that movie. They asked him some question, and I just remembered he spoke for like 30 minutes about the history of the Native Americans in the New York area at the time that doesn't actually get talked about in schools that much. And I was like, what? And also I was very interested in what he was saying, but I was just like, you learned all of this to make this movie and it's still in your head? Like, it's just crazy.
No, for sure. And then meanwhile, Brett Ratner is a traffic cop. but somehow that movie really works. But
it really does.
You know what it is? But I think it's a good screenplay. It is a bit by the numbers, and maybe the book
really
is.
good screenplay, yeah.
But it's really well written. The way the characters are set up and the fact that they focus on the villain more in a way, and it's a lot of it is way more psychological than visual. Personality of the lead we mentioned is a bit more toned down, but it's all internal. And then definitely Ray Fiennes, I feel like his journey, yeah, he's a good looking guy. That's not his issue. His issue is way deeper than what it shows in Manhunter. Like it's psychological abuse when he was a kid and all this stuff. So where regardless of your looks, you still feel ugly. Whereas in Manhunter, they just went for the easiest. Well, he kind of looks like he's not very attractive and he's awkward, basically like an incel type of thing. Where in Ray Fiennes, it's the complete opposite, and that's why Edward Norton says in the end that he almost feels bad for him right before he shows up to try to kill his family. He's a lot more relatable, even though you still relate in Manhunter to.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do relate, and you kind of get him and why he feels abandoned, especially once in Manhunter, she does cheat on him more so. She's kind of slutty more, like she kisses the other guy, whereas I don't think the same thing happens in
not really.
In Red Dragon. It's mostly like he's telling her goodbye before going on vacation, but it's not as if they have a romance.
No.
You relate to both, but yeah, it's different approaches. It's interesting, the differences and why those decisions are made. But I guess we solved it. We said Manhunter. It's all about the lead. Where in Red Dragon, it's more about, at least equal, if not more, about the villains in a way.
I just, for me, the you guys were saying you guys feel they're about the same, and I was the only one saying I thought Red Dragon was a little better. I mean, for me, like the cast is a really big part of it. Like I said before, I think Ed Norton does a little bit better job in those clutch scenes that I think are really, really big for this movie. It's hard to even say this because I think Manhunter has a stellar cast. Will Peterson is probably an underrated actor, I would say. I love Brian Cox, as I've already said. Tom Noonan's outstanding in this movie. He's just so creepy. Joan Allen's always great. Dennis Farina, he's great too. But if I have to really say, I mean, I think Ed Norton was better. I think Anthony Hopkins manages to somehow be better. I think Ray Fiennes is better. I think Emily Watson is better. And even little roles like that nasty Freddie Lowndes guy, that Philip Seymour Hoffman, that scene where he's like glued to the chair, I feel that so much more. I feel like the other guy, I wrote his name down somewhere. I don't know what his name is. Stephen Lang.
You forgot Stephen Lang? Okay.
Sorry. But he's playing a very by the numbers schwarmy character. He's kind of like got that he's that kind of guy. He's gonna get the story no matter what. He's like a paparazzi type guy or whatever, and it's fine. It's fine. But it's like when you see the look on Philip Seymour Hoffman's face when Ray Fiennes drops that robe and he just reveals his naked tattooed body. He looks terrified. I feel bad for him, even though he's scum of the earth. He's outstanding. And the guy who plays Dr. Chilton in Manhunter is also very competent, and he's very good in the couple of scenes that he's in. But that Anthony Heald, however you say his name, I mean, it probably helps that he was so well done in Silence of the Lambs, and then he just basically has to play the same character in this one. But I mean, he's really good as Dr. Chilton.
Yeah, he's sort of like the demented, overseeing the demented.
Yeah, exactly. And he's so cheap, he's you'd hate to know that person.
Yeah, I will say Harvey Keitel was kind of dry for me. I almost prefer Dennis Farina's, even though just the funny thing is just his face and his history elevates the role.
So it's so crazy you said that, Gil, because I love Harvey Keitel. I really love him, but I don't know. I don't like him that much. Well, Dennis Farina's better. And if I'm gonna, this is the one character actually that we have 3 different actors for, actually, is Jack Crawford. I think Scott Glenn is the best out of the 3 of them in terms
easily,
of, just in terms of Jack Crawford. But and then I would actually put Farina second. I think he was a little better than Harvey Keitel.
That's in Silence of the Lambs?
Yeah, Scott Glenn plays Jack Crawford in Silence of the Lambs. He has a whole bunch of scenes with Jodie Foster.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I am going out on a limb, but because I do love Ray Fiennes, but I do think that Tom Noonan was a better Francis Dolarhyde.
What?
I'm saying it and I'm sticking by it.
It was a good performance, and I love him, especially a big fan of his from Last Action Hero.
Wasn't he also he's in Heat, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the guy in the wheelchair who gives
yes.
who gives
he had that line about the early internet, and he's like, it's all out there floating around. I know. He's got like a mustache or something, doesn't he?
Not in Heat.
Why does he look so different I guess because he doesn't have the hair lip or something. I don't know.
Also, RoboCop 2. It's a good performance.
Oh, great performance in Kane. Yeah. I love Tom Noonan.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, no, he's more immediately relatable because of his, he's like bald, he's tall in an awkward sort of way, not in a good-looking sort of way. It's definitely the more easily relatable, but the Ray Fiennes thing is you sort of have to go under the surface. That's the only time where I feel like Red Dragon goes deeper, at least as far as being smart about the way they approach something. Otherwise, a lot of the decisions feel very generic, like very obvious choices. Also, I feel like the relationship, it really helps me that they set up the relationship with the wife. For example, like Mary Louise Parker, who's always good. She's kind of a nothing character. Like she shoots him in the end. He teaches her. But
they do better in Manhunter, huh?
Yeah, they establish her as she doesn't say much in Manhunter, but she's sexy. She's like a sexual object, but in a sort of like strong sort of way. Like, I got your back. I don't like you going back and doing this, but I can be with the kid. I love that
scene because I didn't even remember it until rewatching it, but I love that he's asking her permission, and she says to him, "You've already made up your mind."
Yeah, no, that relationship, that's the one thing that's definitely handled better in Manhunter.
Yes,
there's a little bit of that in Red Dragon, but it's not as strong, and it's too bad because it could have easily been. Could have been just a mild direction issue. But yeah,
it could also have been a time thing too. Maybe they just decided to skip it because they were putting so much time into the other stuff.
Yeah, and I think the father-son relationship also was stronger in Manhunter, but
It was like that scene I talked about with the product placement.
Yeah, no, and then also on the beach, they do the whole thing. They build the net for the thing, which comes back in the end. When they go back.
Wait, what comes back in the end?
Like they build a net for, I don't know if it's the turtles or something that come out of the water or something, and they're gonna.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then they come back to it in the end. It's like when they come back to the same house. Anyways, it's interesting the way they approach it, and obviously, whatever the movie's trying to do, I don't think Red Dragon made a mistake by focusing more on other things and not this. Visually, too, the one thing is just the scenes with Lecter being so white and bright and Manhunter, of all things. Everything is so dramatic in Manhunter, but then the lighting in those scenes is like a hospital. But then you go to Red Dragon and they do the whole Silence of the Lambs where it's extreme. It's like a dungeon.
Yeah.
And there's the only white is like his clothing and everything else is like dark around him. Yeah. So it's very different approaches visually. Strange, actually, but maybe that's the idea. Is like it's supposed to be like all white, sort of it's like a Japanese thing, like it's symbolizing death or something.
I mean, it's kind of getting into Michael Mann's whole clinical streak too.
Yeah, like he
thought
he
that,
wanted Lecter to be clean or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
we were talking all about all these guys about, which one was we preferred in one movie over another, and so on and so forth. And we talked about Jack Crawford being played by 3 different people in 3 different movies. So if you look at all 4 of these movies, like the 2 that we're talking about now, which are a remake of each other or whatever you want to call it, and then the other 2 adaptations of the other books that came after, Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. It's interesting that you've got characters actors like Anthony Heald playing Dr. Chilton in 2 of them. You've got Anthony Hopkins playing him. I almost said himself. Oh, that's sad. Playing Hannibal in 3 of them. But I found it very interesting. As soon as I saw this in Manhunter, I almost jumped out of my seat to grab my computer and double check that I wasn't going crazy. But the nurse orderly character, Barney, the big, tall, black guy, he is the same actor in Red Dragon as he is in Silence of the Lambs. And he has one scene in Hannibal at the very beginning when he sells the Hannibal Lecter mask to Gary Oldman. He's playing the same character in all 3 movies. But what's interesting is he's also one of the police, like SWAT team lieutenants in Manhunter.
Yeah,
so he's the only actor who's in all 4 movies.
Yeah, Frankie Faison.
Yes, Frankie Faison.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. Man, and he's in his 70s now.
Yeah. Well, these movies are 20-something years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good on him.
Yeah, it's a good example of, for sure, of like watching these of just the different approaches. Like one is extremely visual, one is almost feels like a very good TV show, borderline not a movie. Like the performances is what elevates it really, but not the visuals. Yeah, that's one thing I would say. One last thing is there's some really elaborate one-ers and shots that Michael Mann does in Manhunter that just, I think there's one that's in Red Dragon. I think it might be in the house, Dollarhide. So, I think so, but other than that, it's really a lot of it is just coverage. Whereas Manhunter is a lot of 2 shots and mixing movement into it and just a lot more dramatic. So it goes to show these are very good examples. Like somebody would watch Red Dragon, is like, man, it's a good movie and it's got some good visuals. But then you see Manhunter's like, oh wow. Like, I guess Red Dragon wasn't as cinematic as I thought, and maybe Manhunter was too cinematic. But it gives you an idea, I think, for film students to see this.
Yeah,
you totally see where's the difference with filmmakers. You could do the same thing with like a Spielberg movie. Watch any Spielberg movie after any other movie in the world, pretty much. It was like, oh shit, like this guy moves the camera like he's connected to it with some sort of like cosmic powers. It's so different.
Since you brought it up, I was just gonna say I think Dollarhide's house is also one of the things that to me is like a strength in the Red Dragon movie, because the house helps tell the story of why he's so screwed up and his origin with his abusive mother or grandmother, whatever the heck she was, the woman who raised him. And it's only because the only person he brought to his house was blind that he gets away with not being outed as a psychopath or whatever for living in this creepy, crazy old house. Whereas in Manhunter, it's just like super 80s. And I mean, you could walk like through that house and you'd be like, well, this just looks like the house of a guy who's like a kind of a little obsessive about certain things here and there. But I mean, you wouldn't think he was crazy.
Yeah, it's a good looking house.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and he lives like on the lake, and she gets out when like the morning after, and like the sun is rising, and he walks out. It's like a perfect shot of the sunrise.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell is this? Like, are they gonna like make out now?
I actually really love that you're talking about in Manhunter, right?
In Manhunter, like it's
Yeah,
so
I love
romantic
that
when he gets
shot
out.
because he runs up to her, like you're saying, and he does something with his posture. Like he's so tall compared to her, and she's a tall woman, but at least I believe she is. But like he walks up to her, he's so tall, and he kind of does this thing where he's standing up straight, but then his head and shoulders kind of hunch down a little bit, and I'm like, oh man, he's messed up. They're like all in silhouette.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I would say, which maybe brings it back to Silence of the Lambs. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll award it with an episode. But
Yeah.
I know Silence of the Lambs has always been cast as this great horror movie, right?
Well, there's a debate about it, I guess.
It's a debate, yeah, exactly, because it's not really a horror movie. It's more suspense, but because it's there's such scary moments in it, like scares, like boo type of stuff, that with Lecter and maybe later on with the Buffalo Bill, but definitely Red Dragon, Manhunter are not that. It feels like it's definitely more suspense. It's clear that these are not. I did find it amusing. It's on IMDb. They qualify Red Dragon as crime drama thriller, and then Manhunter is crime mystery thriller. So it kind of shows how like Manhunter is just a little bit more mysterious than Red Dragon, and maybe this sums up the differences about this the way both movies were approached. There's just Red Dragon is just kind of straightforward. It's a procedural, and Manhunter is like it's in the shadows and all very mysterious.
I mean, isn't that kind of a relevant difference between the two movies in that, Manhunter came out before Silence of the Lambs and, before Hannibal Lecter became like this household name that everybody just knows, Hannibal the Cannibal. Manhunter was kind of more cloaked in mystery, whereas Red Dragon, it not only came after Silence of the Lambs, it came after Hannibal. So, like, Red Dragon comes out, and they're dealing with a much more well-known property. they are dealing with something where you know who this dude is. It just had to be handled entirely differently.
And in a sense, it's almost like Red Dragon. We had all the pieces. We just needed to hand it to somebody to put it together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could still be approached within that.
Of course.
As more mysterious as far as the mystery of who this guy is and the whole thing with Lecter. Like, for example, like they don't show much about the relationship with Lecter. They don't show the scene in the beginning in Red Dragon and Manhunter where Lecter injures him. But it is just interesting. Yeah, it's a different approach, and
actually that's kind of interesting. That first scene where Hannibal does stab Will Graham at the beginning of Red Dragon, would that have been stronger in Manhunter?
That's the thing. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. The only reason why it works in Red Dragon.
About Graham.
Yes, but also in Red Dragon, this is actually a good point. It only works in Red Dragon because it's a prequel. Otherwise, like if you see Lecter for the first time in those scenes, that's not. I mean, Lecter has to show up the way he showed up in Silence of the Lambs, like in a cage, mysterious, like scary. Like you don't want to see him as some sort of person that looks normal and is, going to a concert and all that. That only works in Manhunter. There would be very little context. It wouldn't make sense. It would basically, he would be, one of his advisors that ends up being the one who tries to kill him, but there's no context there. Like the power of that scene.
I would argue that you're absolutely right. That we we can kind of love the scene because it's a prequel that came after 2 previous movies and so on and so forth. But I mean, I bet you if you showed Red Dragon to somebody who had never seen any other one before and didn't really know too much about the story or anything like that, they would just be surprised probably when he shows up with the knife and whatever, and it would probably just be like a twist or something. It probably wouldn't be like, this makes no sense at all.
Yes, and also you wouldn't get that he kidnapped the and killed the bad musician and then fed him to the
well, except that they explain it in the
later
in
on
the following little newspaper clippings.
on newspaper clip. Yes, but again, it'll be a bit of a shock. Yeah, it's just it would be a bit too much. It's like, where's that movie? You know?
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
it is strange that if he's so smart, Will Graham, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he has no clue.
Right.
That he doesn't
It
suspect
does come
him at
full
all.
circle in a nice way, though, at the end when he can comfort Emily Watson and tell her, like, when she's like, I should have known. And he's like, you know what? Sometimes you can't, he's like, I've been there. Trust me.
Yeah, I guess he does. So that works out. That's touche there.
Yeah, but still, like there's that whole thing about, this is dialogue that I would attribute not to Brett Ratner, because I don't think he's ever written a paragraph in his life.
Wow.
but like, that I would attribute to a Brett Ratner movie. Like the whole.
Sorry.
I gotta hear what you're saying. I don't know what you mean yet.
Yeah, in that scene where Will Graham is sitting there and talking to Hannibal, and you have that whole spiel where he's like, you're the most brilliant clinical psychologist in the world, and I don't understand how you didn't see this. How can you telegraph that more than what they had on the screen? I mean, especially after we've already seen 2 fucking movies with Hannibal, and we know what this guy is. Everybody knows what this guy is. And you've got Will Graham sitting there like, oh, geez, you're just baffling me. You're this brilliant guy, and you should have seen this before I did. Why didn't you see this before I did? I'm just oblivious. It's just it just doesn't work. It is one of those things where, again, for all of Manhunter's flaws, again, I give it points in that Michael Mann didn't have a crutch when making Manhunter. Brett Ratner had 2 crutches.
Yeah.
I mean, he had everything just laid out on a plate for him, and all he needed to do was make a competent movie, and it was going to be okay. I mean,
like X-Men 3. So, anyway.
Michael Mann actually had to be creative, and he made mistakes in Manhunter, but those were his mistakes. And Brett Ratner just took a script that he didn't write, because I doubt that he's even literate.
Damn.
And
I assumed there was going to be some insulting of Brett Ratner here, but I
feel like noob. I'm in the background sweeping the floor. I'm like, God damn.
I'm speaking for myself, not for my friends. And all he needed to do was shoot the damn movie. And I mean, the cast was pretty much already set up for him. The writing was already done for him, and he just needed to point the camera in a direction and get somebody to put it in focus.
No, I mean, it is tough to make a movie for sure. So he did just, but yes, the fact that it's all lined up for him, it's pretty much what he's good for. And he said it himself. Like he actually, one of the famous quotes that he has is that I'm the type of movie that Hollywood brings in when they already have a surefire hit and they just need someone to.
I didn't know he ever said that. That's funny.
Yeah, there was something where I don't know, somebody was acting out his quotes. It was like a parody of him, and
wow.
And yeah, it's like these are actual quotes from Brett Ratner. Yeah, but in any case,
well, I was just gonna say, since we're saying so much about Brett Ratner here, I wanted to say two things real quickly, just in defense of Red Dragon, real quickly. Just that one thing is that if we can just for a brief moment think back to 2002, right? This is right at the beginning of the terrible explosion in Hollywood of, maybe I should say, instead of explosion, saturation of prequels. Because in 99, Star Wars Episode 1 made more money than any movie ever should have made. And it did it before it even sold a ticket. It's just ridiculous. And everyone suddenly prequel was like a household name, or household word, I should say. Sorry, phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, how many prequels did you ever see before Episode 1? I mean, there's like Temple of Doom and what? Maybe 2 or 3, 5 others ever in existence. And then suddenly that movie made so much money, Hollywood just said, oh my gosh, if there was a movie that anybody even remotely liked, we got to know what happened before it. And suddenly there's like prequels to everything, stuff that we absolutely did not need at all. And if you look at how many pretty bad ones there are out there, like Red Dragon's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I was just going to say is that I literally just saw this right now, and I can't believe I had forgotten all about this, but it's crazy to me to think that I don't know if you guys mentioned where you thought it compared, but I said at the beginning, and I still stand by this, that Red Dragon is a better movie than Hannibal. And it's Ridley Scott, and it's got Gary Oldman in it. And I didn't remember this until right now, but it was written by David Mamet.
Yeah.
And it's still not as good.
Well, that makes my argument that Ridley Scott is overrated.
But I love Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve Zalian. Yeah, it's like good writers.
What else has Steve Zalian done? I don't know his name.
What?
I'm just clicking on him now. What else has he done? I don't know.
Oh, he wrote a few Spielberg films like Schindler's List.
Oh my God! Yeah, Schindler's List, Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Yes, Bobby Fischer. He's a good writer.
Remake of the American Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah, no, American Gangster. Yeah.
I was actually kind of thinking about this in terms of Red Dragon and Manhunter, but I think it's actually more relevant when it comes to Hannibal. Like, just the comparison of like different sports. I mean, a point guard in basketball is just going to be a good point guard in basketball. It doesn't matter if he gets traded from one team to another. I mean, you're just a good point guard. In football, we talk about scheme fits, right? You could be a great quarterback and a great wide receiver and all that stuff, but if you don't really fit into the system, you're not going to really optimize things. Like you're not going to be performing all that well. To me, Hannibal is a perfect example of getting a bunch of superstars on your team, but they don't fit the scheme.
Yeah. I think it's a movie that has great moments and overall doesn't work, which is probably exactly similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, you're good at running zone, but we're running man all the time, so it doesn't really work. I mean, Steven Zalian and David Mamet are two of the greatest writers ever, and I can see how they don't mesh as like a team writing a screenplay.
Yeah.
I mean, Ridley Scott. I like Ridley Scott more than Gil does. But
many do, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I could see how this is just like, you have like an all-star team when it comes to talent, but nobody really kind of fits into the roles correctly.
Yeah, and I guess that brings it back to Manhunter and Red Dragon, that both have really good casts that, for the most part, work really well. Yeah, in different ways.
Very different ways.
Yeah.